I would like to, first of all, thank you on behalf of the Jaume Bofill Foundation for giving us the chance to have this conversation with you. And let me ask you, because you often talk about focusing on the learning process instead of the teaching process. So I don't know if you could explain a little bit this idea, like where does this leave the teacher role, or what are, according to your model, the teacher's main responsibilities?
Sure. Yeah. When I say I focus on the learning over education, what I mean by that is that if you look at a lot of traditional education, you come into the classroom,
Mm.
you sit down, the teacher comes in and starts talking, and the teacher has a plan. The teacher knows exactly what he or she is going to work through that day, and the students kind of follow along. So the whole process is inherently driven by someone else if you're a learner. Right? Like there's some flexibility, but overall, like the big decisions are made without you. What you're supposed to learn in a particular year, and then hopefully you'll pass the year, then you go on to the next year, like all those structures, who you're sitting with in a particular class. All of those things are decided by other people. And yet, in a way, what we're trying to prepare people for, learners for, is a world where they are going to be making a lot of those decisions. How to pick goals, how to choose what they want to work on, how to find collaborations with other people. And so really, I feel like the focus, there's a mismatch between what we're hoping learners will grow up to be as people, and how we're structuring the education system around them. And that said, there's a very, very important role for the teacher. So when we say learning over education, we don't say learning over teachers, because we think that teachers are, first of all, learners themselves. They know more about learning than most other people, so they really are experts in this space. And even in a learner-centered paradigm, the role of the teacher is extremely important. It's just a slightly different role. So someone, I don't know who originally said this, but I like the image of, it's not the sage on the stage, which is the old model where someone stands up there and knows everything. It's the guide on the side. So it's more like on my level, it's not further like kind of removed far away from me, further up, but it's someone who's collaborating with me, who guides me through questions that I may struggle with, who challenges me in the right way, who inspires me, but who is part of my learning, who supports my learning progress rather than focuses on giving me the structure from someone else's perspective.
Okay. You often advocate for active learning pedagogies like hands-on activities and project-based learning, but how feasible do you think those approaches are in compulsory levels of education where actually students have less skills and less knowledge compared to university students?
Well, I think there are some big assumptions in that question. One is that they actually do have not the right level of skills or the right set of skills. And I would maybe question that assumption, because if you look at kindergarten, and one of the groups that I work with very closely here at the Media Lab is called Lifelong Kindergarten. And if you look at kindergarten, and they are experts in this space, you actually find children doing hands-on, experiential, collaborative learning in teams almost exclusively, right? They very rarely do they sit and study something first before they're allowed to build it. No, they take the tools, they start building things. It doesn't work. They talk to other people. Sometimes they argue. There may be tears occasionally. But that they're really doing the kind of learning that we think is the best way to learn. And And then for whatever reasons, mainly administrative reasons, we are removing the opportunity for them to continue to be learners in that way as the years progress. And then at some point we feel like, okay, now maybe they're ready to learn this way again. But by that time, most of them have actually lost the ability to be these playful learners. And so we're kind of uneducating them over 10, 12, 14 years. And then we expect them to be creative learners again at the end. And so I think the problem is really that there are some underlying big assumptions about what school needs to look like. And we should be questioning those assumptions and ask ourselves if those are really still appropriate for the way we're structuring education.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, some authors talk about the new learners. They use labels such as new millennials, digital learners, Google generation, and so on and so forth. And they often claim that those learners have new learning preferences. Now, do you think there really is a distinctive generation entering university? And if so, uh, do you think that we should change the teaching methodologies in order to better address their preferences or not?
I don't think it's a yes or no question, even though you're asking it that way. I think there are certain things about learning that are uh, deeply human, and they don't really change over the generation. So we know that people learn better if they're curious. Like if you're interested in learning something, you will spend more time, you'll go deeper, you'll be more engaged. So there are certain things about learning that are, I think, just like basic good principles. And those we should not change. We should make sure we have a few of those that we believe in, and then we should create environments in which people can learn this way. That said, the world changes and has probably changed much faster in the last 20 years than maybe it changed between 1800 and 1820. So understanding how children and young people are affected by those changes, by the amount of information that they have access to, by the tools that they are very comfortable using, which we may not be as comfortable using, and understanding how that could be part of the learning experience, I think is very important. I work at the Media Lab. All we do is build technology, so I'm a huge fan of technology, but I think it's that combination between what does the world outside of school look like, and making sure that people can be members in that world and be creators and designers and shape the world, but also holding on to some principles of what we think are good ways of learning. And we probably want people to learn with other people, because they are going to be spending a lot of time in the rest of their lives working with other people or in relationships with other people. So understanding how they can relate to other people seems really important. Creating space, I mentioned curiosity, creating space for people to discover what they are passionate about, what they really want to learn. That seems like a really good design principle, regardless of technology. So I think the two can go hand in hand and kind of complement each other really nicely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now you mentioned curiosity, but what do you think is the role, or what should be the role of formal education in promoting entrepreneurial attitudes and promoting creativity? Do you think this can really make an impact in the long run in the students' work life and in society economics?
Absolutely. So when we talk about the things that we hope students at the Media Lab develop, we often use, and you can ask different people, you'll get different answers, but I think kind of there's a few things that most people agree on, and they include design creatively, reason systematically, and work collaboratively. And there are many others and other ways of describing them, but those seem both connected to creativity, so coming up with new ideas and new ways of solving things, but also actually designing and building them. And I would I would think that they are also deeply entrepreneurial, because we're trying to give people the space that they can find solutions that are meaningful to them, that they understand how those solutions might be meaningful for other people. They're trying to understand how people would use the things they're developing. So I think those ideas are important, especially since the world around us changes so much faster. It's very difficult to know what are the facts and what's the content that we want to make sure someone learns, because most likely in 10 years, most of that content is outdated. I studied computer science, and by the time I finished my degree, what I'd learned in the first year, some of those things weren't really applicable anymore. So understanding, and I think we're like, even if we just take a step in that direction towards creativity and entrepreneurship, I think it's a step in the right direction, because we're so far on the other end of the spectrum, where we're looking at content that people have to study and remember and master, that we're often not focusing enough on those other skills. And I saw a diagram actually this morning about what percentage, what was the exact, it was the amount of content you had to remember as a knowledge worker. And I didn't read the underlying paper, I just saw the slides. I don't know how reliable this is, but it argued, the general trend I think is we can all agree on, is that 100 years ago or 50 years ago as a knowledge worker, you had to know in your head about 80% of the things you were using every day. Like my dad is an engineer, he knows a lot of engineering just out of his head, right? Like he has all the models and the functions, everything. And that today, for most knowledge workers, somewhere between 10 and 20% is actually required, because so many of the things you do rely on other technologies. So it's more about using technologies to do the things you want to do. And that fundamentally changes how we should educate people, right? Like we should educate them to do very different things and be masterful users and designers, rather than know all the content and all the facts.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How far do you think we can use online learning communities in schools? I mean, do you see it as a complement to traditional schooling, or do you see it as replacing schooling itself?
I see it as a complement. I think there's some incredible things about humans spending time together face to face, sitting around a dinner table and having a conversation. There's a lot of information that gets passed between people in ways that we don't even understand yet. And so the richness of that interaction seems like something that I'd always be nervous about arguing for a solution that takes away this opportunity. At the same time, there are certain things you can do online that are equally amazing. Like I can be part of a conversation with people from 100 different countries where they're sharing their experiences, and we can feel like we're connected as part of a community. Or I may be interested in something that nobody in my environment is interested in, and so traditionally I would stop pursuing that. Now I can pursue interests that are maybe unusual for my background, because I can connect with people who are not in my surroundings. And then I think there's a much bigger question around, will we feel like traditionally, historically, socially, we're very good at feeling part of communities that are physical communities. That's what we've learned over thousands of years. Will we feel equally part of online communities in 10 or 20 or 50 years? And do we have to develop the skills to be active members of these communities? I would argue that we do, and that we will feel like membership in those communities is maybe as important as other face-to-face communities. So yes, I think the complement is interesting, and I wouldn't argue for one or the other, but really understanding what one is best for and then using it for that. And also there's an equity component in this, right? It's very easy to design the perfect learning system with the best professors in the physical environment where I can sit at the table next to them. That's only accessible to 0.1% of the population. So if that's what we're trying to do, then we have to acknowledge that we only care about 0.1% of the population. If we care about everyone, we're going to have to find ways to combine the two.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me ask you this, which could also be based on some assumptions, but uh, how far do the pedagogies based on peer-to-peer online learning assume existing students' motivation? Like, for instance, how to manage students' attitudes against teamwork or complaints about peer learning being more bothersome or more difficult? I don't know if you have those complaints at MIT.
Definitely, definitely. So a couple of thoughts. One is, I think it makes sense actually to complain if you are being asked to work in a team where a lot of first of all, you don't have a lot of freedom to make decisions. Like in many cases, you don't get to choose who you're working with, what you're working on. You don't get to choose what you're going to be assessed on and how you're going to be assessed on it. And also the system you're operating in really right now um, focuses entirely on the grade you get at the end of the year, right? So like if we're telling students the most important thing is the grade you get at the end of the year, then working in teams can be a distraction. Because what if you have a weak team member? What if the other people in the team don't agree with you? You're spending time discussing with them when you think maybe you're the smartest and you shouldn't be helping other people. So I feel like we've set it up to make it really difficult for students to be happy and successful team workers. But there are examples where the system was set up in a different way. And actually, I have one student here who came from a small engineering college in Massachusetts called Olean College. And I went and visited them. And their students almost entirely work in project teams on things that they care about that are part of their curriculum, and they love it. So when the student came here, like she just had this approach to working was completely different from other students, where like, the first thing was always, who do I know who can help me with something? Who's interested in the same things? How can I get them excited about it? And she'd constantly bring people here who were experts in certain things that we needed help with. And the ability to do that, I think, once students realize that this is going to be useful to them, they'll be much more excited about working in teams. And once the education system has the flexibility to reward people for being team workers, I think students will also get a little more excited about it. But yeah, the overall system isn't really set up for students, for smart students to be huge fans of teamwork. The school doesn't really encourage that, I would argue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and speaking about students' complaints and mismatches, let me bring up this point because I feel that one of the most common complaints from students about MOOCs is that they don't provide personalized feedback from experts, and by experts here I mean teachers, and that those online environments are rather impersonal. So, how to manage massive educational processes in order to provide more accurate assessment and personalized feedback to the student?
Yeah, so first of all, I totally agree with the feeling that they feel anonymous and they don't feel very social. You don't have a strong connection to other people. I think that's a big design flaw of many of the MOOCs. Um, uh, and then to the other question about, so I think feedback and assessment are not necessarily the same thing always. And I would argue, that feedback is the more important one. Like you want to get, if you're doing something, you want to get feedback to know if you're on the right track, but also to know that someone actually has paid attention to it. Like if you're just typing your answers into some computer system and nobody ever responds, then that's probably a very lonely learning experience. So building communities where people give feedback to each other and helping them give better feedback, I think that should be the first step. And we would get pretty far, I think, with just those peer-to-peer feedback communities, and then have experts. At certain times, you may need someone with more experience. I'm always a little nervous about experts because it's very easy to then rely on the expert for everything, right? Like the expert knows, and the expert needs to give me feedback. When really, I mean, first of all, we can, I truly believe that with a bunch of other people, we can figure out most things. you know, using the internet, the people we have access to, asking questions, working hard, we can figure out most things. So finding a way to involve experts in a way that makes sense, I think, is the challenge. And giving people the confidence that they can solve a lot of problems on their own with other people who are also trying to solve problems, I think is the other piece. But yeah, I mean, I think that's I completely empathize with the feeling that MOOCs are lonely and you don't get enough feedback. But I think peer-to-peer feedback could be a big part of that solution.
Mhm. Okay, Philip, so that was it. I would like to thank you again for having given us the opportunity to have this discussion with you. That was real food for thought, like they say. Okay, so thank you very much.
Great, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Those were some really intriguing questions, I think, that would be worth spending more time thinking about, and I will certainly continue to think about them more.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.